Welcome back, sewists. If you saw my video on Sunday, I did a little surprise fabric haul. I'm going to sew one of those fabrics today. So good. Today's project is New Look 6511. This pattern's been in my stash for a while and I've wanted to sew it up. I'm going to be doing the dress version, View B. Let me show you the fabric. It was in the haul on Sunday. It's this beautiful green with the lovely, it's like a leaf design in it. I really like this fabric. I'm very excited to try it. I bought 3 yards. I hit the sale and didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I knew I wanted something like this. I knew I had a pattern, wasn't sure what I needed, so I just picked up 3 yards. I did pre-shrink it. It's 100% cotton. It shrank very little. So I'm very excited about that. So I still have pretty much 3 yards. This pattern for View C, which is the dress for a size 18, only takes 2 yards, but it's short. I measured on myself and it's 33 inches length from the back of the neck to the hem bottom, and on me that's just below the rear end. It's too short. So I've done a few alterations. Let me show you. This is the skirt panel. You're going to cut 2 of these on the fold. It's the same front and back. And you can see it's not very long at all. And actually, I could have made View C and treated it as a top, worn it with leggings. It was short enough for that. But I really do want a little dress. So I left the tissue attached to the top and I have lengthened it 5 inches. I'm trying to get it close to knee length. I've also added 1 inch to the center front. It was wide enough in the hip, but I wanted just a tiny bit more fullness to get the nice gathered effect for my hip because I'm so full in the hip. So very basic alterations to this because it's just a rectangle. So easy to alter the skirt. And if you need extra fullness but nothing in the bodice, you can add it to the skirt and you'll just have a little more gather, which is great. Now let me show you the top. It only goes to a size 18. So here is the bodice front. I've added a 1/2 inch to the top where the waistline, or it's really an empire waist or a higher waist, but I've added a 1/2 inch, and that was just because of where this line hit. I didn't want to hit too close to my bust line. If you look at her, here's her bust line and you can see where it is. Well, I'm a much fuller busted person, so this line came closer to my bust line, which is just not as flattering. So I've added just a little bit to give me a little extra length. The dart is going to help. And then I've added 3/8 of an inch to this side seam in the front because I need more in the front. So it's giving me a little extra fullness. The measurement was almost perfect, which means there's no wearing ease, and I need a little wearing ease. The nice thing about this pattern is the sleeve is not a true sleeve. It's a cap, so it only is sewn at the top. There's nothing attached at the bottom. So if you make a little change to your side seam here, it has no effect on this little sleeve. So nice. So I've added this to the bottom of my bodice on the front and the back so that they match up at the side seam. So those are all of the alterations I've made. Worst case scenario, I'll go with a little bit narrower seam allowance if I need to, just because the bust line, here's the 18, and that finished garment measurement is my bust measurement, and that's just not that much of a wearing ease. So laying this out is going to be very straightforward. Because my fabric has this little leaf design, I have to be careful not to flip my patterns top to bottom or I will have leaves going down and leaves going up, and I want them all going the same direction. I should have enough fabric to make a couple little tea towels out of this for my kitchen. This is the perfect fabric for a little kitchen towel. So I'm going to lay out and get cutting. Our bodice front and both skirt pieces are on the fold, and then the back and the sleeve are not. So pretty easy cutting. With this having a woven in pattern on it, it also helps keep your grain line straight. Going to be pretty easy. So I'm going to put a pin in it. I'm marking out my fabric lengths just to make sure I have enough. So that's 1 length of, and here is length 2. I need a center front and a sleeve and a center back. Oh yeah, I've got enough. I don't have a lot of extra left over though, so I probably will not be getting a tea towel or even a ruffle, but I should be able to get the dress. This pattern does not have a pocket, but I do have my little homemade pocket template, so I will be adding a pocket to this and doing my little pocket trick. Cut out my 2 skirt panels, and now I have refolded the fabric to be just wide enough to get my bodices and my little cap sleeve. So I have this piece over here left over that I can get 2 pocket pieces out of, and I may get a little kind of skinny tea towel out of it. We'll see. Everything's lined up. Because this has a woven in design, it makes it easy for me to use that to line up my grain lines with. So super easy grain line. Okay, we're all cut out. I want to say a few things real quick before we go over to mark our dart. You will need bias tape, single fold bias tape, the kind that's flat and not folded in half. So this is single fold bias tape. It's got, you can see it's 2 little edges, so this is what we need for the neckline of this. And you will need a button, or you'll need like a frog closure, something like that for the back neck. I chose to do a button with a shank, one that stands up. I just think that they're a little easier and they look appropriate for this type of little neckline. So you'll need both of those things. You don't need interfacing the way this is sewn. So now that we've done all that, let's head over to the ironing board and I'll show you how to mark your dart. We'll put our dart in. If you've never done that before, I also have a very short little video on darts, and I'll put a link to it up in the corner and you can go see the dart video. All right, let's go mark it. Okay, here's our little bust line dart. We are going to look for our size and we're going to stick a pin right in the center of that hole, straight up and down. And then I'm going to remove some pins so that I can fold back the fabrics. Now I'm marking this on the wrong side. So this is the wrong side of my fabric, and see how I can see the pin coming out. So right where the pin comes out of the fabric, I can make a little mark with my pencil, and I'm very cautious about the colors that I use. I don't use anything dark or anything that'll shadow through or anything that I will regret if it doesn't come out. Now that I've done that, I can open this up. And you can see there's my little dart points. Now for the top of the dart, line everything back up. You can see these 2 little lines here. We'll do the same thing. You can make a clip if you want to with your scissors, or we can do this, and then we will just fold back our fabric very carefully and make the same little markings with our pencil and be ready to sew in our dart. All right, now that we're marked, the pattern has us doing 2 things. One of them is basting or doing a little stay stitching along the neckline, and that's just so it doesn't pull out or stretch while we're working with our fabric. And if you have a loosely woven fabric or anything like that, that's extremely important. I'm going to go ahead and do it too. I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch stitching. Don't need to back stitch. It's not permanent. It's just to protect that bias curve so that nothing stretches out. All right, so now that is stitched in. Do I have this set so the needle always goes down? I do. No wonder I'm having issues. I'll fix that. now that we've done our little stay stitching, I'm going to go ahead and sew in my dart. I always take a pin in my little dart point and pull that through, and then I'm going to line my 2 little yellow dots up here at the top and sew in 2 little bust line darts. I love a bust line dart. If you have a bust line, if you have any fullness in the bust, a dart just will make a garment lay so much more flattering on the body. So let's look at our bust line darts. This dart will press up into the arm and not down. You can see, here's the little dart bit. If we press down, you see how it hangs out, but it has been cut and trimmed in the pattern to press up. So that's how we'll do it. Go ahead and get the other one in. You should not have bubble or pleat at the end of your dart. So if you do, you need to go in and fix that. 2 pretty little bust line darts ready to go. So there's our bodice front. We're going to now go to our bodice back. And we're going to stay stitch our little neckline just like we did before. There are lots of notches, and if it helps you, there's one at the waistline that's to help you with lining up your gathers. There's one in the center back, there's one on the side seam. Mark as many as you need. The sleeve is always important, and I always mark it. When I am stay stitching this, I am just doing it at about 1/4 inch. It's really to keep the integrity of the shape of the neckline. You just want to make sure that it's less than where you're going to be sewing later, so you don't have to rip it all out. Before we sew, in the back it has a little circle. That circle is where our opening is going to be, which I forgot to mark, so I'm going to mark that right now. It's pretty important. Now, the way they have us finish off this in the back, we just double fold and top stitch it, but that does not finish below. You could double fold and top stitch all the way down if you want to after sewing the seam. But instead of doing that, it's a little bulky, it's a little more than I want in my back. I'm just going to serge straight down this first and finish off that the back seam allowance, and that way when I go to do the next step, I don't have to worry about it being unfinished. Now we have backs, so now I'm going to line my backs, center back on center back, right sides together. I'm going to look for my little yellow dot, and that's where we're going to start sewing, from the yellow dot down to the bottom, 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so we're going to sew from the bottom to the little yellow dot. So now we have a back with a little neck opening to get it on and off. So we're going to go to the ironing board now, and we're going to press this seam open all the way up the 5/8, and then we're going to fold back under to do the little double stitching at the neckline. Now, because I serged mine, I do not have to do the double fold back. I can just straight stitch mine down. I'll show you this over at the ironing board so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, here is my center back seam. So we're going to press this open, and we're going to press all the way up 5/8. So this is 5/8 inch all the way across. Now, because this is serged, I do not have to do the little fold under and top stitch. I can just leave it flat, which I'm going to do. I'm going to have a little bit wider opening in the back, and I'm just going to leave mine flat. It'll also make it not pucker right here where you go from folded under to not folded under. But if you don't have a serger and you don't have a way to finish that seam, go ahead and fold under 1/4 of an inch along here, like this, and press it down so that you'll have your full 5/8 inch taken up, 1/4 of an inch tucked under, and then you self-finish this edge and it'll look really pretty. So this is how mine looks all pressed, and it makes the seam look so nice in the back when you press it also. And now I'm ready to go ahead. I'm going to flip it to the right side, and I'm going to top stitch this. So now we're ready to top stitch. I'm going to just line it up under my foot. Don't forget to back stitch, and I'll show you how the top stitching looks. Now, if you are doing the double fold, you will be stitching at a little less than 1/4 of an inch, because I have a 5/8 inch turn back because of serging it. I am going to be stitching at 3/8 of an inch. Hit the right one. So now when I come down here, you can just sew and just backstitch right there if you want to, but what I'm going to do, and it helps to have this foot because it has little markings so I can kind of see how far I'm going. So this is how it looks. I love this fabric. It's just making the stitches disappear. Isn't that pretty? So now that we have a back prepped and a front prepped, and we finished off that little back opening, we have done step 1 and step 2 and step 3. So we are now ready for step 4, which is shoulder seams and side seams. So we're going to take our bodice front to our bodice back and lay them on top of each other, right sides together. Line up those shoulder seams. Now, if you're serging, you can serge this together and serge off your seam allowance. If you want to, you can serge the edge first, then sew it together at 5/8, which I think I'm going to do. I always like to keep my seam allowance, so I'm going to just serge the edges of these independently first and then come back and put them together so everything has a nice finished edge. I am not serging, however, the armhole part yet, because I want to take care of that with the sleeve. But we'll go ahead and do this. The shoulder seams and side seams. Again, not taking anything off. This fabric does fray, however, so all of this seam finishing is very important. When I serge, see how it's all attached? Instead of breaking my threads every time, I just wrap it around and keep going, and then come back and separate all those threads. It makes it go a little faster. This is how it looks when I'm serging just to get the edge. Nothing's coming off. Finishes off the edge real pretty. Pin all of these things together. Whoops, one more. Boop. So I'm going to lay my front on my back, right sides together. And I'm going to pin all seams first, and then I can just sew instead of pinning one seam and sewing it. That's my personal preferred method. I will tell you, you could, since I did this little striped leafy pattern here, if I wanted to, I could have really worked hard at getting it to line up perfectly at the shoulders. It lines up pretty close as it is, but I did not try at all for that. I wasn't concerned about it with this type of design, but if it's important to you, buy extra fabric if you want to match up any patterns like that. If it's a plaid or a stripe that's horizontal, it's important to match it up across the body. If it's a stripe like this that's up and down, a vertical stripe, it's not as important for shoulder seams. It matters more for like skirt. However, because we have a gathered skirt, that kind of takes care of it too, because the gathers move all of the design around a little bit, so makes it a little easier. 5/8 of an inch. Don't forget to backstitch a couple of stitches. All right, time for a haircut. This is how it looks right now. It's got all its little hairs. I did not break the stitches in between. I just kind of pulled it out and kept going. It's a little faster. My machine does have an automatic thread cutter, so I could use that if I wanted to, but it's actually faster just to do it all at the end, I think, in my head. Could be wrong. I haven't done an efficiency study on it. So we're just giving it a quick haircut, and then we're going to go over and press open all of these seams. Our shoulder seams and our side seams, and we will be ready to move on to the neckline and sleeve after that. So I get all my little hairs. All right, let's go press open all of these seams. Oh, I'm loving this so much. I love this fabric. I'm telling you, pressing makes everything look so much nicer. So now we're ready to start bias. Boop, boop. So we're going to take right side of bias to the right side of our garment, and their pictures are really good. You have two little folded down edges for your bias, and we're going to fold one up. we're actually going to fold it back up because we're going to stitch in that fold all the way around this. And you want to hang it off a little bit. You need a little seam allowance at the edge, so we're going to line that up. Okay, so this is the inside of the shirt. This is the right side of the bodice part, and you can see I've opened up my bias and pinned it on. We have a little bit hanging off at each end. You want like half an inch or so hanging off. So I have one continuous piece of bias going all the way around, and now we're going to just put this under the machine and we're going to stitch in the ditch. We're going to stitch right in this little fold all the way around. And if you look at the directions, this is what they're showing. The directions say stitch a 3/8 inch seam, which is very close to that fold. It may be just on the other side of it, and that's so the neckline fits nicely. So we're going to take a couple stitches, back stitch, get rid of the pin. This line right here is my 3/8 inch line. And you just want to keep everything lined up as best as you can and go around the circle. Bias is lovely because it takes those curves. And you also want to make sure that these shoulder seams, that you don't get a fold over, that they stay nice and flat. If you're uncertain, sink your needle and flatten it out before you get to it. Okay, now we're going to start folding and pressing to the inside, and you want to fold it so that you have just a little bit of the fabric pulled to the back. That way you don't have any of your bias peeking through to the front. So we're going to pull this down like this and just press and pin, and because we have all of these clips, it should pull around very nicely. If you have a part that's not pulling nice, or that won't fold over nicely, that is starting to pull or give you a funky ripple, go in and make another little clip in that area. I'll show you how it looks at the ironing board. All right, I have pressed everything to the back and stuck some pins in it, so this is the wrong side. Here at the corners, you want to fold it back to the inside like this so that you have a nice, pretty even edge. From the outside, it looks like this. And now we're ready to head to the sewing machine and top stitch it in. And we want to do a true top stitch, so you're going to put it this way. All right, so this, I'm going to give it another little press because this stuff wrinkles, but this is how it looks on the wrong side. Or the right side and the wrong side. So you can see how pretty that is. And I have one spot right here where I missed. So I'm going to come back and restitch this little area. You can see how I just went off and I am like right next to it. So we're going to stitch this little area. And of course it's right in the center front. That's how it always works out. You may have some areas like this in the back where it's a little deeper than others. This is the nature of bias, where it's turning like this, depending on if it's a convex or concave curve, it may grow a little bit. So that's what you're seeing here. It's a little wider and it's the shape of the curve that it's taking. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do this little thing right here, but to start with, we need a nice heavy thread, a decorative thread like an embroidery floss, something like that. This is actually a thread for doing sashiko, which will work great. And then, but it can be hard to thread your needle. So I put regular sewing thread through my big needle, and I have a loop at one end and the tails through the other, and then I can slip this through the loop. And then when you pull the tails, if you don't break your thread, you can pull it through and thread your needle if you don't have a regular needle threader. And now we're threaded and ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and put a knot in one end here. All right, and I'm going to cut off a piece. We don't need too much, but I always would rather have too much than not enough. I wanted to do, this is just off of white, just ivory, but I could not find ivory. In my stash I had bright white, and I had this green, which is really close, so we're going to go with the green. So the thread with it, or the end with the knot, is right here. I'm going to come over here and we're going to bury our knot inside the area where we have just finished our bias. So I'm going to just pull this through. And I have been having real problems making knots today where I don't want them, so I'm going to be a little more careful. There we go. So there's my knot. We're going to tuck him up inside and we'll trim that thread later. And we're going to just make, where's my button? Here's the button. We want to make sure that it's big enough to go around our button. So our button's going to go on this side. I just went in my stash and looked for it. So we're going to just make a little loop here, about as deep as my stitching was. You can see there's where my top stitching is. So there's my loop that I'm making. Why am I having such a problem making knots today? There we go. So here's my little loops. And they have to be big enough to go around our button. So we're going to slide our button through. You want it to be just big enough. You don't want it to be too loose. And remember, you're going to be doing this behind your head, so you want to make sure it fits. Once you figure out that size, you want to do it have a couple little loops. I'm going to go back one more time. Take another little bite. I want to hold it so that I don't change my first loop. There we go. So now I have two loops. Now we're going to come around. We're going to catch both loops. We're going to go through both loops and up. And can you kind of see how I'm coming up in the middle here? And we're going to pull that to the edge. If you crochet or tat, this will look familiar to you. And we're just going to keep working our way around, keeping it nice and neat. And you can see how heavy it's making it. I wish I had the perfect green or the perfect ivory, but this will have to do for today. And now you can see how the stitch is looking. It goes really fast. And then we'll just make a knot when we get to the other end. And you can see here's my tail. So I only want one layer of the thread. And you want to keep it from rolling. So can you see how all my little knots are on the outer edge? And that just makes it look neat. If it starts to roll and fold, it'll roll a little bit when you're done, but while you're stitching, if you can keep it flat, that's why my thumb, I'm kind of holding up between my thumb and my forefinger to keep it from doing anything crazy. This thing's in my way. There, scooch him out of the way. Almost all the way around. Oops, bumped the camera. So now, can I get one more stitch in? I think I can. I'll get one more in right here. And then we'll make a knot. All right, and then when I go to do my knot, I'm gonna poke through and come to the wrong side because we don't want our knots on the front, if at all possible, and it also reinforces it. Then we'll come back here. I'm gonna run my thread back just a wee bit. And I'm gonna knot way over here, away from the edge where it won't be seen. You can also try and tuck it inside or behind if you need to. All right, that's it for sewing on our little buttonhole loop, or little button loop, and now I can go ahead and sew the button on the other side. Now to sew the button on, I have taken my two tails and I've tied a knot in them, and I'm going to be pulling it through. I started to pull it through like that, but I'm actually going to bury my knot inside. So I'm going to come like this, kind of in the middle of where I've stitched. And now that knot goes to the inside. I can trim off that little thread there. And now we can just sew through our button. Now we have to decide, do we want our button to go up and down or to the side? I'm going to make mine go side like this. And now we're going to just stitch through. And because I have such heavy thread, I don't have to do as much sewing around and around and around and around. I'm just going to take a couple stitches and it'll be good. Whoop, I think I just went around the wrong way. Make sure we're in there right. There we go. And through again and ready for a knot in the back. And this knot I'm not as worried about. I'm not worried. I'm gonna go back to my little stitch that I started with and we'll make our knot right here. All right. If you feel like it's not tight, you can go and make a second knot. And we're good. And now, this is how it looks in the back. All ready to go. Here we are. And I have the button on the back. And we're ready to now start working on sleeves. I'm just so in love with this fabric. So we are down to step 9. So step 9 has us gathering at the top and doing our hem. Do the little method I showed you for marking our darts. You're going to put your pin through and mark all of your circles because that's where we're going to gather through. To gather, make sure you set your machine to a longer stitch. So we're going to go ahead and do some little gathering lines. This only has 3/8 of an inch seam allowance in the sleeve because we're going to be bias binding it. So when it says gather, you do not want any of those stitches to be deeper than 3/8 of an inch. All right, 2 basting lines are always better than 1, though when it's as narrow as this, it's a little harder to get 2 in, but can be done. All right, we're going to set our machine back to a regular stitch and we're going to go over to the ironing board and we're going to press up our hem. So we're going to fold up a 1/4 of an inch and then press it again a 1/4 of an inch and top stitch it in. And now that the whole hem is turned up, I'm going to come back and tuck this under and press it. So I'm going to tuck that so that it comes all the way to the fold and then back around and then press and put a few pins in it and we'll be ready to top stitch. Okay, so that's how it looks, and it's actually staying so nice I don't even really have to stick a pin in it, and we're ready to stitch. Okay, we are now ready to top stitch these in, and for me, I'll be stitching at about a 1/4 of an inch, which really makes this 1/4 inch foot nice and easy to use. Make sure you set your stitch length back and that you're no longer set for the long basting stitch. I hit the cut thing again. I hate that I do that. I hit the wrong button all the time. Let's try again. Instead of back stitching, I cut my threads. And that is how the stitch looks from the front, and that's how it looks from the back. Okay, we have 2 sleeves. So now we're going to find our front and our back on our little sleeves. There's the front. So I'm going to do right sides together, and we're going to start at the shoulder. We're going to pin on shoulder to shoulder seam of our sleeve. This fabric is it does like to fray a little. And then once we pin that on, we're going to come down to the notch to notch, and that will help us know how much to gather. So once you get the bottom, where the bottom goes, we're going to measure back up and put a pin in it where there's no gathers, and then we'll see how much little gathers there are to put in. Same on this side. Okay, so now when I turn this around, here's my sleeve, and this right here is what's going to get gathered up. So we're going to pull our little gathering lines, and I always sew it so that the right side is up and the bobbin thread, so that when we go to pull, the bobbin thread's the one that pulls easier, and we're going to put in the sleeve, the bobbin thread's the one that we see. So then I can gently pull that. Not a lot of gather, it'll kind of look like a set-in sleeve. More gathers in the back than in the front. It's much easier to sew in your sleeve first and then come back and apply the bias than trying to do them all in one operation. Put as many pins as you need to pin it into submission. Keep your gathers where you want them. And I personally think it's going to be easier to stitch it like this. So I've flipped it around so the sleeve is tucked on the inside. So I have the wrong side of the shirt showing. 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't forget to back stitch. And I'm stitching with the bodice down and the sleeve up so I can see my gathers. You can always stitch it the other way around if it's easier for you to get it in, but I like to see the gathers so I can tell if I'm going to get a fold over or something. Now if you look at their picture, it looks like the sleeve comes way farther down on the arm's eye, and it's just the way the drawing is. In real life, the sleeve is up high, the little sleeve cap. So let me flip this around real quick. So from the front, here's the dart, and there's the little sleeve, and then from the back, isn't that is so cute. So that's how it's going to look. We're going to do bias next. I'm going to go ahead and get my other sleeve in, and then the gathers at the top. It's very attractive. Very, very, very attractive. Like it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put in the other sleeve, and then I'll come back and show you how to do bias. All right, we are pinning in our bias. I'm starting at the underarm seam, and where I'm starting, I'm going to fold back so that when I cross over, this edge will be finished. That bias will be nice and finished, and I don't have any raw edges. I'm lining up my folded edge of my bias with my 3/8 inch line that I stitched. So there's no stitching down here, but up here where you can see it, this little line right here is laying right on top of my stitching line where I stitched in the little sleeve cap. So I'm just pinning it around like so, lining up that little fold. It's real easy to just see the fold. The fold just lays on top of that stitching, and then I flip it up and stick a pin in it. Nice bent pin for you all to see. Get my pins closer. And then we're just going to stitch all the way around again, and this will overlap. We're going to let this come all the way across and cut it so that it's longer, so that it overlaps where we started. Being careful not to let this pull and stretch, and here there's some bias in this part of the arm's eye. We don't need any, don't need to stretch out our little armhole here. Put in quite a few pins just to keep it nice and neat. And I'm not going to pin this down here. This may stretch slightly, so I'm going to just leave it off that last little bit. I'm going to trim it. I can always cut it shorter later. And now we're ready to go to the sewing machine and stitch 3/8 of an inch. So when I got here to the sewing machine and started to sew, I realized that I had pinned back this side, but when you sew, that's where I'm going to finish. So I released it and I pinned this side back to start over here, which is one of the nice easy things before you get started. It's easy to switch that. So we're going to press all this to the back like that, and we will pin it into submission and press it, and then we will flip it around to the right side and we will top stitch it. And I can see I have a little pulled thread right there. I'm going to pull that through to the back so that we don't end up with messed up stitching. So I'm going to fix this little thread real quick. Now that we're ready to do the bias around the sleeve, and it's just finishing everything off with bias just makes everything look lovely and pretty, but it's also a pretty easy application. If you have a free arm, I have my tabletop on right now, this might be the time to use it. So I'm going to remove my tabletop so I have this nice little small free arm. Oh, and there was a pin hiding underneath there. And I can now come to my sleeve and see how it will slide right on. Nice and easy to be stitching. Now we want to stitch close to the edge of our bias, but not off, which is going to be, for me, about a 1/2 inch. I'm going to go just inside that 1/2 inch, but not as short as 3/8. I'm starting at the underarm, making sure my sleeves, my seams are pressed open, and making sure that my bias is overlapped. I've got quite a few pins in it to hold everything in place. So now, if you don't backstitch here, it's okay because we're sewing a circle, and you'll just come around and catch it on the other side. And the sleeve is free, so the sleeve will be over here. We're stitching on the other side of the sleeve. Where the dart and sleeve all come together, it's a little bulky. You could do a little trimming out. I'm not, because mine frays like crazy and I do not want to have it fray through, so I'm leaving everything in there. We'll give it a good pressing, maybe lump it with a hammer in a bit. And we're around. All right, so I've gone all the way around. Give it a little haircut here. Take out any pins I missed, and now I'm going to look at the back side and make sure that I caught everything, that I stitched deep enough, and if I need to, I'm going to go back and stitch a little deeper if I didn't catch all sides, or if I look like my seam allowance got a little off, because where you sew where the sleeve is, you cannot see your thread, your throat plate markings, because the sleeve is in the way. So I can see right here I got a little narrow, so I'm going to fix that. Just go a little deeper right here on the sleeve part, and then on to skirt. Look at how cute that is. Oh, that's so cute. At this stage, you could try it on if you want to. Make sure that it fits okay and that you don't need to make any adjustments. And now we're ready to move on to skirt. Now, if you're doing the skirt without a pocket, you're going to sew your side seams together and then do some basting stitches along the top, but I'm putting a pocket in. So we're going to stop right now. For me, this is not in the directions. Now these skirts are just rectangles, and I want to make sure that I sew these so that my little leaves, or whatever my design's not upside down from my bodice. So this is the top, or the waistline, and I want to make sure I don't lose track of that. Here's my pocket. This is my little piece that's left over. I had this left over. I am going to just hem it and treat it like a little tea towel or a little tray cloth kind of thing. To do the next step on my pockets, I'm going to serge the straight edge only on all 4 pockets. All right, so now that we have pockets finished on that one edge, cut those apart. I'm going to now go to my skirt pieces, and I'm going to serge my outside edges for both skirts. I'm going to go ahead and serge these outside edges of both of my skirts. We're going to get a pocket. We've got to match our pocket to our, so here's a pocket and here's the front of my garment, and we're going to lay them right sides together. about 9 inches down, I think, and pin it on. Now when I sew this, I am not going to sew flat. I'm going to sew it's just from top to bottom. I'm going to leave a little seam allowance on each end from where I'm sewing because I have to come back and sew around this, and I need the space. So I'll show you a little close-up of what it looks like. So here's my skirt, and I've measured down where I want my pocket, and I've pinned my pocket down, right sides together, and where the pins are is where I'm going to start and stop. I want to have some seam allowance above and below so that I can sew my pocket together afterwards. So only going to sew between the pins, leaving some seam allowance around. So I'm going to do that for all 4 pocket pieces, front and back. Doing exactly the same thing, using my first pocket to line every other pocket up with it. And I'm going to put my tray table back on. So we're going to now lay our 2 skirt pieces on top of each other, right sides together. And you want to fold your little ears out, your little pocket ears out. We're going to sew these in 2 operations though. We're not going to sew down the side seam and around the pocket. That always ends up binding part of the pocket, and you will almost always get a bubble. We don't need that. We don't need a bubble on our hip. What I can do is serge around my pocket real quick, which is what I'm going to do. So here's my pocket, and right here is where they, here's skirt and here's pocket and here's where they separate. So I'm going to take these pocket pieces, I'm going to kind of fold back those seam allowances on top of itself, and I'm just going to serge all the way around the pocket. And it will not touch the skirt, so it's only pocket only, and it will completely enclose the pocket and finish off the raw edges. So I'm going to do that for both pockets, and then we'll come back and do our side seams. If I feel like I need to, I can come back and sew a little closer around the pocket near the side seam with my sewing machine if I think that there's some places that need a little bit more attention. So this is the pocket. Here's the skirt back here out of the way, so you can see only pocket underneath there, and I've actually folded back my little seam allowance so that I can sew here. Make sure you take pins out. We don't want to hit a pin with our knife. We're going to do this all the way around to here. Now that that is done, we will come back and sew above and below the skirt, or above and below the pocket, our skirt pieces. Just sew our regular 5/8 inch seam allowance, and we'll sew up to where the pocket starts, and we'll just stop right there. We won't sew into the pocket at all, and that will give us a nice smooth pocket, and it'll make everything lay nice. So I'm coming down to where the pocket is, and right here, it's hard to see because it blends in so much. Here's my stitching. So I'm going to pull the pocket pieces up out of the way, and as I sew, I'm going to sew right up to where that pocket is. Stop. Whoop. Back stitch. And then I'm going to move down below the pocket, and I'm going to kind of do the same things. Push the pocket out of the way and start over here. Whoop. There we go. So you can see where the pocket stitching ends, and that's where I'm going to begin my below the pocket down. All right, so when that's done, I'm going to show you from the right side. I have not pressed anything yet. I'm getting ready to press everything. But there's my pocket. Now, when I'm done, this pocket will be supported. Right now it's not supported, but here's a pocket in that side seam, and it just really disappears, especially once I get it all pressed. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. and press it. What I'm going to do is press the side seam open above and below the pocket, and I'm going to press the whole pocket right at the pocket area towards the front because we don't want our pockets in the back. All right, I'm going to press it, and then we will discuss putting in our gathering lines to gather our skirt to our bodice. Now that the side seam is done, the directions say to put in the basting at the top and the hem at the bottom, and it can be done in either order. Unless you are concerned you're going to have to change your hem length. I'm not. I'm going to live with whatever it is. So I'm going to go ahead and press in my hem. And by what I'm going to do is I'm using my little ruler here. I'm going to press up 5/8 of an inch all the way around, and then I'm going to come back and tuck it in and press it again and just top stitch it around. You could, if you want to, press up whatever hem you decide you need, serge that edge. Let me say that differently. You could serge this edge and then press up whatever hem you want and do a top stitch deeper. So if you would like a deeper hem, if you need less off, if it's too long, for instance, and you want just a little bit deeper hem, you could do it that way too. But I'm going to do just like the picture shows in the directions and do a rolled hem. So here is how the hem looks ready to be stitched in. I'm going to start at a side seam and just stitch around. We are hemming away. That looks so nice. Nice finished hem. Okay, we're ready to now put our gathering stitches in. We do have 5/8 of an inch seam allowance this time, so I'm going to do 2 gathering stitches, one at about 1/4 of an inch and one at 5/8 of an inch, or 3/8 and 5/8, something like that. Make sure you set your machine back to a long stitch, and we're going to do one line of stitching for the front and one line stitching for the back. You do not want a continuous line all the way around. It makes it very difficult to get your gathers even and to work with it. We want to make it easy to work with. You can either make the gathering stitches evenly go all the way around the body, or depending on your figure, sometimes it's more flattering to have them sort of centered on the body, so more concentrated in the front and the back. And that can be, it just depends on your shape, which is better for you. So you can move the gathers around if you need to. So if you want it a little straighter on the side and a little fuller in the front and the back, you can do that. I'm putting a pin in my center front and my center back so that it's already divided. The side seams are part of the quartering, so I don't even have to put a pin at the side seam. I have a seam there. That makes it easy. So I'm going to just put a pin at the front and the back in the center, and that will make it a little bit easier when I'm ready to start evening these gathers out and so forth. So now I'm going to just run basting lines. Whoops. Now I'm going to take my bodice and I'm going to mark center front and center back on it. And the way I do that is I just match up my side seams and mark. Now, the back's easy because it has a seam, so I really only have to match my center front. Center front to center front. Right sides together. We're going to just start pinning this around. So I'm going to pin my center front to my center front. And now I'm going to find my center back. And now I'm going to pin side seam to side seam. So now that we've done that, when I hold this up, you can see this is the fullness of the skirt that we're going to pull in with our basting lines. So now I'm going to grab those bobbin threads, hang on to them carefully, and just start pulling and moving that fullness around. Now these are not super full gathered skirt. It's not going to be super tight gathers. We just want to get it as even as we can to the eye. I'm not worrying about having a lot of gathers right on the side seam. And then we will stitch this in on the 5/8 inch line, which will be just like right on top of our 5/8 inch gathering line. And then we will come back and serge the raw edges, the 2 edges together, and it's done because we've already finished everything else off. We've already got our hem in and everything. All right, here is how the little gathers look. This is the skirt side. This is the bodice side. I'm going to now just start at a side seam and machine stitch, straight stitch right on this basting line, which is 5/8 inch in. Once it's completely stitched around, all the pins are out, I'm going to come to the serger and I'm just going to serge this edge here all the way around, and then I will show you the little trick for the pocket. Don't forget to set your stitch length back to a regular sewing length because you were just basting. Get that pin out of the way. We're just stitching right on top of that 5/8 inch line, trying not to get any foldovers on our gathers. And skirt is on but not serged. Before I trim any threads, I check it. It's a very good idea before you cut any threads and you can't go back and fix it to check to make sure you don't have any foldovers, a little hole, something like that. And when everything looks okay and you like your gathers, so here's the back, here's the front, check it all out, and if everything's good, then you can give it a haircut. Now I'm going to the serger, and I'm going to let the serger do most of the hair cutting. If any of the threads snuck through to the front side, like this one right here, I'll go ahead and get that now. And we will also make sure that your side seams line up and that sort of thing. And now I'm going to just serge all the way around, and then we will do our little pocket trick. I've got some elastic over here. You can also use ribbon to do the pocket support. So let's serge real quick. Serging the edge, I'm not serging anything off. I'm leaving the seam allowance in there. You can choose to cut away some of that seam allowance if you want to. I'm not, because that always leaves room for me to do alterations. All right, so there we are. And here's my back. I'm going to put a little tag in it. I haven't done that yet. I'm going to put a tag over here on the side seam. Just so there's one in here. You can put it in the waistline, wherever you want. I'm going to show you my pocket trick. We take our little pocket, and we're going to take a piece of elastic, and we are going to measure the distance from the pocket to the top of our skirt. So it's about 7 inches. Let's see. It is 7 inches. So I need about 7 inches of elastic. I'm gonna need 7. You could also just use ribbon. It does not have to be elastic. I kind of like elastic. I just think it's nice and bouncy in there and works real well. And we're going to take this elastic and we're going to sew it to the top of our pocket up here. So I'm just going to stitch it across and hold it down. And we're doing this, I'm doing this on the side of the pocket, like the pocket part that's against my body, so it's not going to show through on the outside. That's my concern. Okay, so here's my pocket. Here's my little piece of elastic. And we're just going to sew that elastic on. You can zigzag it, you can straight stitch it, you just want it held down well. Okay, just going to let the pocket lay smoothly on the inside of the skirt, and we're going to pull our elastic up to the top, or our ribbon, and we're going to put a little pin in it, and we're going to stitch it up here in the seam allowance too. And now the pocket is supported by this, and it won't sag. So that's it. Okay, I'm going to stitch my top of my pocket in over here, and then I'm going to go do the other one. So from the inside, I'm going to just turn this around. Keep finding threads. So from the inside, can you see the pockets? And they're supported by the elastic. So if you put your phone or something in there, it doesn't pull on the side seam and stress the side seam. All right, I'm ready to go see how this looks. We'll go put it on the dress form or maybe on me. See you over there in just a minute. So here's the little dress, little pocket. Remember, I added 5 inches in length to get this to the knee length, which is my preferred length, right below the knee. I really like for the summer. It's very cute. If this is a little too boxy for you, you could easily add an elastic to the seam on the inside, and it would just tuck this in a tiny bit, make it very flattering. I'm going to wear it as is. Slightly boxy. We'll see how I like it. A lot of times I do end up putting a little elastic inside just to give it a little more shape for me because of my shape, so I don't look like a big block. But this is the cute little dress, little button in the back, very easy to get on, very comfy to wear. Love the fabric. This is from Hobby Lobby. It is in the ducking, I believe is what it's called, and it has it looks like it's embroidered, but it's a woven in design, so this is definitely going to be a summer favorite. This pattern could be made in a knit just as easily, and you can easily add a pocket like I did. Please let me know if you make this pattern. I would love to know if you've sewn this up or if you've sewn with this fabric too. If you like my videos, I would appreciate it if you would like and subscribe. It helps other people who are interested in sewing tutorials and similar content find my videos and grows our sewing community. See you next week for another fun video.